X stood in the Grand Assembly Hall of Aura Prime, his four eyes scanning the massive chamber where representatives from 200 species gathered for military briefings. The station floated in neutral space, serving as the primary training facility for the Galactic Coalition's armed forces. As a young observer from the diplomatic corps, X had spent 3 cycles studying warfare theory and tactics. Today, he would receive his first field assignment. Commander, a senior officer with dark blue scales marked by battle scars, approached the podium. The room fell silent. "We have new developments in the border territories," announced. "The Empire continues its expansion into the contested zones. Intelligence suggests they are preparing a major offensive against Coalition holdings." X leaned forward, his interest growing. There were formidable opponents, known for their ruthless efficiency and superior numbers. "To counter this threat, we are deploying mixed battalions to strengthen our defensive positions," continued. "Observer assignments have been finalized. Several of you will accompany these units to document tactical effectiveness and report on joint operations." The commander's gaze swept across the room before stopping at X. "Observer X, you are assigned to the human battalion currently stationed at Forward Base Meridian." A ripple of whispers moved through the assembled observers. X felt confusion wash over him. Humans were newcomers to the Coalition, having joined only 2 cycles ago. Their planet Earth was a recent discovery on the galactic stage. Why would he be assigned to observe such an inexperienced species? After the briefing ended, X approached Commander in the adjoining corridor. "Sir, I wish to understand my assignment," X said carefully. "I studied the warfare patterns of the shock troops and the siege specialists. Why am I being sent to observe humans?" His expression became difficult to read. "You studied tactics, young observer, but you did not study humans." "They are a minor species," X replied. "Their world is small, their technology is adequate but not exceptional. What tactical value could they possibly offer?" "That is precisely why you need to observe them," said quietly. "File your report after you return. I believe your perspective will be enlightening." The conversation left X more confused than before. He spent the next day cycle reviewing available data on humans. The information was limited but consistent. Humans came from a world they called Earth, a planet with surprisingly harsh conditions. Gravity was higher than galactic standard. Temperature variations were extreme. The atmosphere contained free oxygen, which was unusual but not unique. Physically, humans were unremarkable. They stood roughly 2 meters tall on average, possessed bilateral symmetry with 2 arms and 2 legs, and had primitive sensory organs. They lacked natural armor, deadly claws, or venomous defense mechanisms. Their strength was average at best when compared to other Coalition species. Nothing in the data explained Commander's cryptic warning. 3 days later, X boarded a transport to Forward Base Meridian. The journey took 6 hours, giving him time to review tactical reports. The base housed a mixed garrison of Coalition forces, with the human contingent making up roughly 20% of total strength. When the transport docked, X was met by Lieutenant Gregory Hayes, a human liaison officer. Hayes was tall for his species, with short brown hair and calm brown eyes. He wore the standard Coalition uniform with human rank insignia on his shoulders. "Welcome to Meridian, Observer," Hayes said, extending his hand in the human greeting gesture. X had read about this custom and carefully grasped the offered appendage. "Thank you, Lieutenant. I am eager to begin my observations." Hayes smiled slightly. "I'll take you to meet Captain. She commands our Marine company." They walked through the base corridors. X noticed the humans moved with quiet efficiency, their footsteps barely audible despite their mass. They nodded respectfully to other species, but did not engage in the loud camaraderie common among warriors of other races. Captain's office was sparse and organized. She stood when they entered, her posture straight and professional. She had hair pulled back from her face and sharp blue eyes that seemed to evaluate everything. "Observer X," she said with a slight nod. "I understand you'll be accompanying us on deployment." "Yes, Captain. I am to document your tactical operations and combat effectiveness." "Understood. My Marines will cooperate fully with your assignment." She gestured to a chair. "Please sit. I assume you have questions." X settled into the seat, which was sized for humans and slightly uncomfortable for his frame. "I have reviewed the limited information available on human military doctrine. Your forces appear to favor small unit tactics and ranged weapons. This is common among lighter species. His expression did not change. We adapt to circumstances, observer. They are larger and stronger than humans, X continued. They have natural armor plating and can operate in environments that would kill most carbon-based species. Standard coalition doctrine suggests avoiding direct confrontation when possible. How do humans plan to engage such opponents? We engage them the same way we engage any enemy, replied calmly, with discipline, coordination, and determination. The answer seemed inadequate to X, but he did not press further. Instead, he asked, "May I observe your training exercises?" Of course, we have drills scheduled this afternoon. The training field was a large open area equipped with holographic projectors and tactical obstacles. X watched as human Marines ran through combat scenarios. They moved in coordinated units, communicating through hand signals and brief verbal commands. Their weapons handling was competent but not exceptional. Their physical performance was adequate. Everything about them seemed ordinary. Observer standing nearby. A massive creature with 6 limbs and thick armor plates made a dismissive sound. "These humans are soft," the rumbled. "One strike from a warrior would break them." X found himself agreeing silently. He watched as the Marines completed their exercises without fanfare or celebration. They simply cleaned their weapons, checked their equipment, and dispersed to other duties. That evening, X compiled his preliminary notes. Human Marines appeared disciplined and professional, but nothing suggested they possessed any tactical advantage. They were smaller than most warrior species, lacked natural weapons or defenses, and seemed physically fragile. Their training was solid but unremarkable. He could not understand why Commander had spoken with such weight about this assignment. The following morning, new orders arrived. The Empire had begun its offensive 3 days ahead of schedule. Coalition forces were being mobilized to defensive positions across the border territories. The human battalion, including Captain's company, would deploy to a contested colony world designated as Settlement 73. X packed his observation equipment and prepared to join them. He expected to document a competent but ultimately average military unit facing superior opposition. Perhaps the humans would perform adequately before requiring support from stronger coalition species. He had no way of knowing that everything he thought he understood about warfare was about to change forever. As the transport ships loaded and the Marines boarded with quiet efficiency, X noticed something strange. The humans showed no signs of bravado or false courage. They did not boast about coming victories or mock their enemies. They simply prepared their equipment, checked on each other, and waited for departure. Lieutenant Hayes sat near X during the loading process. "Nervous observer?" Hayes asked. "I am merely here to document," X replied. "I do not participate in combat." "Smart choice," Hayes said with a slight smile. "Though I suspect you'll see things that documentation can't quite capture." "What do you mean?" Hayes looked at the Marines around them, his expression growing serious. "You'll understand when the time comes. Just remember, observer, we're not here to be impressive. We're here to do what needs to be done." The transport engines began their ignition sequence. Within minutes, they would launch toward the battle zone. X adjusted his recording equipment and settled into his seat, confident in his role as a neutral observer of what would surely be a standard military engagement. The coalition warship cut through the darkness between stars, carrying its cargo of soldiers toward Settlement 73. X had secured quarters near the human Marine section, allowing him to continue his observations during the 3-day journey. The ship's common area buzzed with activity from various species. Warriors arm-wrestled and exchanged battle stories. Engineers debated weapon modifications. Scouts reviewed terrain maps with animated gestures. The humans sat quietly in their designated section. X approached with his recording equipment. A group of Marines occupied several tables, performing what appeared to be equipment maintenance. Sergeant Danny Mitchell, a stocky man with weathered features and gray touching his dark hair, looked up as X approached. "Observer," Mitchell acknowledged with a nod. "Need something." "I wish to understand your pre-battle preparations," X said. "Other species engage in rituals. Warriors challenge each other, meditate. What do humans do?" Mitchell glanced at his fellow Marines before answering. We check our gear, we rest, we prepare. That is all. A younger Marine, Private Lisa Morgan, looked up from the rifle she was cleaning. She had red hair tied back and freckles across her pale skin. What else should we do? X struggled to articulate his question. Do you not feel the need to prove your courage, to demonstrate your readiness for battle? Courage isn't something you prove before a fight, Mitchell said simply. It's what you do during one. X settled near their group, his recording device active. He watched as they worked. Their movements were methodical, almost meditative. Each weapon was disassembled, cleaned, and reassembled with practiced precision. Equipment was checked multiple times. Corporal Jake, a lean man with careful hands, sat across from Lisa Morgan. He appeared to be a medic, based on the medical supplies spread before him. First deployment? Asked Morgan quietly. Yes, she admitted. Her hands trembled slightly as she worked. Scared? Morgan hesitated, then nodded. Good, said. Fear means you understand what's at stake, means you'll be careful, watch out for your team. What if I freeze up? Morgan's voice was barely audible. You won't, Mitchell interjected, not looking up from his work. You trained for this, your body knows what to do. When the moment comes, you'll move. How can you be sure? Mitchell finally looked at her, his expression gentle despite his rough appearance. Because you care about the people next to you. That's what pushes you forward when everything else tells you to run. X found this exchange fascinating. In most warrior cultures, admitting fear was considered weakness. Yet these humans spoke of it openly without shame. Do you experience fear, Sergeant Mitchell? X asked. Every time, Mitchell replied. Been in 7 major engagements, scared in all of them. Yet you continue to fight. Fear and duty aren't opposites, observer. You can be terrified and still do your job. That's what being a Marine means. Over the next day, X observed more of their preparations. He noticed small details that seemed insignificant at first. Many Marines carried photographs, small images of other humans. When he inquired, explained they were pictures of family members. This is my daughter, said, showing a small photo of a young human child with a bright smile. She's 5 years old, lives with her mother back on Earth. Why do you carry this image? Reminds me why I'm here, said simply. Why the fight matters. X did not fully understand, but he recorded the information. On the second day of transit, Major Alan Foster, the battalion executive officer, held a briefing for all coalition forces. The situation room filled with soldiers from a dozen species. X positioned himself where he could observe everything. Major Foster was a tall, thin man with gray hair and a calm demeanor that seemed unshakable. He activated the holographic display, showing Settlement 73 in detail. Current intelligence indicates forces outnumber coalition defenders approximately 3-1, Foster stated without emotion. They have orbital superiority and have already begun bombardment of defensive positions. A commander raised one massive limb. These numbers suggest tactical withdrawal would be prudent. We cannot hold against such odds. Coalition Command has designated Settlement 73 as critical infrastructure, Foster replied. The colony houses 30,000 civilians, including families from 8 different species. Evacuation is but requires time. How much time? O officer asked. 48 hours minimum to evacuate all civilians safely. The room erupted in protests from various species. The mathematics were simple and brutal. Holding a defensive position against 3-1 odds for 2 full days was nearly impossible. Foster waited for the noise to subside, his expression unchanged. Human forces will establish the primary defensive perimeter around the evacuation zones, he stated calmly. We will hold for as long as necessary. You cannot hold against such numbers, the commander insisted. Your species lacks the physical strength that will overwhelm you. Perhaps, Foster acknowledged, but we're going to try anyway. This is foolish, an officer said. You will sacrifice your soldiers for no tactical gain. Foster's gaze swept the room. The tactical gain is 30,000 civilians reaching safety. That's sufficient reason for us. The meeting continued with logistical discussions, but X barely heard them. He was trying to process what he had witnessed. The humans knew the odds. They understood the likely outcome. Yet they accepted the assignment without hesitation. It made no logical sense. That evening, X found Sergeant Mitchell in the common area, sitting alone and staring at a small photograph. "May I ask you something, Sergeant?" Mitchell looked up. "Sure, observer." "Your species knows this battle will be difficult. The casualties will be severe. Why do you accept this mission?" Mitchell was quiet for a long moment, still looking at the photograph in his hand. X could see it showed a woman and two small children. "You see those civilians we're protecting," Mitchell finally said. "Some of them are human families, but most aren't. They're a species I'd never heard of 3 years ago." "I do not understand your point." "My point is it doesn't matter what species they are," Mitchell said quietly. "They're people who can't defend themselves. They've got kids who are scared, parents trying to keep them safe. That's all I need to know." "But you may die protecting them." Mitchell smiled sadly. "Yeah, but they'll live. Seems like a fair trade to me." "Your species has a different concept of fairness than most." "Maybe," Mitchell agreed. "Or maybe we just remember what it's like to be the ones who need protecting." The next day, the ship emerged from faster-than-light travel near Settlement 73. Through the observation ports, X could see the planet below, already by orbital bombardment. Warships circled in high orbit, their weapons batteries visible even at this distance. Coalition forces began immediate deployment. Smaller transport ships launched from the main vessels, heading toward the surface. X boarded one with captain's company. The descent was rough. The transport shook from atmospheric turbulence and proximity to ongoing bombardment. X gripped his seat, his multiple hearts racing. The humans around him sat quietly, weapons held ready, faces calm despite the violent shaking. Lisa Morgan sat across from him, her earlier fear replaced by focused concentration. Jake checked his medical supplies one final time. Danny Mitchell closed his eyes, his lips moving in what might have been a prayer or meditation. The transport's hull glowed red from reentry heat. Warning lights flashed. An automated voice announced impact in 30 seconds. X realized he was terrified. He had observed warfare from safe distances, studied it in classrooms, read about it in reports. This was different. This was real. The transport slammed into the ground with bone-jarring force. Before X could process what was happening, the rear door dropped open and the Marines were moving, flowing out into the smoke and chaos beyond. Captain's voice cut through the noise. "Defensive positions, second perimeter, move with purpose, Marines." The defensive perimeter took shape around the evacuation zone with desperate speed. X watched from the command bunker as human Marines and coalition forces worked together, transforming the open ground into a fortified position. Prefabricated barriers went up. Weapon emplacements locked into place. Fields of fire were calculated and marked. Colonel Henry Brooks commanded the human battalion from the bunker's central position. He was an older man, perhaps 50 Earth years, with gray hair and lines etched deep in his weathered face. Despite the chaos around him, his voice remained steady as he coordinated defensive positions. "Second Company, extend your left flank. We've got a gap near Sector 7, Brooks said into his communication device. "Fourth Platoon, I need you covering the approach from the river valley." X set up his observation equipment in a corner of the bunker where he could monitor everything. Through the sensors and cameras, he watched the battlefield take shape. The colony settlement sprawled behind them, where civilian transports were loading refugees as quickly as possible. The evacuation zone hummed with activity as families from multiple species hurried toward safety. Beyond the defensive line, forces gathered like a dark storm. Lieutenant Sophie entered the bunker, her uniform already dusty from helping establish the forward positions. She was young, perhaps 25 Earth years, with dark hair and determined eyes. "Colonel, 1st Platoon is in position," reported. "We're holding the junction point between sectors 4 and 5. "That's our most exposed position, Lieutenant," Brooks said, studying the tactical display. "We'll hit you hard once they advance." "Understood, sir. We'll hold it." Brooks met her eyes. "I know you will. Keep your people sharp. This is going to get ugly fast." Saluted and left. X watched her go, nodding the confidence in her stride despite the danger she was walking into. "Observer," Brooks said, turning to X. "You should know that this bunker might become a target. If you want to evacuate with the civilians, no one will think less of you." "I am assigned to observe," X replied, though his voice trembled slightly. "I will remain." Brooks nodded. All right then, stay near the exit points and keep your head down. The first assault began an hour later. They came in waves, thousands of armored warriors advancing across the open ground. X had studied these extensively. They stood nearly 3 meters tall, their bodies covered in natural armor plates that could deflect most small arms fire. Their strength was legendary, capable of tearing through steel with their bare claws. They felt no fear, no hesitation, only an absolute commitment to conquest. Coalition forces opened fire. The defensive line erupted with weapons fire. Energy beams and projectiles streamed toward the advancing. Explosions blossomed across the battlefield. The noise was overwhelming, a constant roar that made coherent thought nearly impossible. X watched through his sensors as the first warriors reached the outer barriers. They smashed through the obstacles with brutal efficiency, their armored bodies absorbing damage that would kill most species. A defensive position on the eastern flank began to buckle under the assault. The massive warriors fought valiantly, their natural strength allowing them to engage in close combat. But the numbers were overwhelming. Within minutes, the commander ordered a tactical withdrawal. The eastern flank collapsed. Second company fall back to secondary positions, Brooks ordered calmly. Third platoon cover their withdrawal. More coalition positions began giving ground. The defenders pulled back from Sector 6. The forces retreated from the northern approach. It was textbook military doctrine when facing superior numbers: delay, withdraw, preserve forces for counterattack. But the human positions did not move. X watched as Sophie's platoon absorbed the full weight of the advance at the junction point. The defensive position should have been overrun in minutes. Instead, the humans held. Private manned a heavy weapon emplacement, his position completely exposed to enemy fire. Warriors charged directly at him, fired continuously, cutting down attackers even as weapons fire impacted the barriers around him. When his weapon overheated, he drew a sidearm and kept shooting. X could hear the communications between the human positions. "Fall back," someone shouted. "Negative," replied, his voice strained but steady. "If I leave this position, they flank second squad. I'm staying." He stayed. The junction held. X noticed something else happening across the human defensive line. A Marine went down, hit by fire. Immediately, 2 other humans moved to his position, one providing covering fire while the other dragged the wounded soldier to safety. It happened again and again, humans refusing to leave their fallen, exposing themselves to danger to recover the wounded. Jake worked in a medical station just behind the front line, treating injured soldiers as they were brought to him. The station was barely protected, vulnerable to enemy fire, but never stopped working. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, stabilizing the wounded and sending them to evacuation points. A soldier was brought in, badly injured, treated him with the same care he showed human casualties. "Why do you risk yourself for other species?" X asked, his recording equipment capturing his work. Didn't look up from his patient. "Because he's hurt and I can help, nothing else matters." The first assault lasted 4 hours. When the finally to regroup, the battlefield was littered with bodies. Coalition casualties were significant, but the line had held and more civilians had reached the evacuation transports. X emerged from the bunker during the lull, his sensors recording the aftermath. What he saw challenged everything he thought he understood about warfare. Human Marines, exhausted and bloodied, were sharing their water and rations with soldiers from other species. Lisa Morgan, who had admitted her fear just days ago, was helping repair a damaged barrier section. Danny Mitchell's squad was reinforcing positions while simultaneously checking on wounded from other units. A human Marine named Private Hayes limped past, blood seeping through a bandage on his leg. "You are injured," X observed. "You should evacuate." Hayes glanced at his wound. "It's not that bad, patch me up, I can still fight." "The injury will worsen in continued combat." "Maybe," Hayes acknowledged. "But there are civilians who still need protecting. I'll get it properly treated after they're safe." He returned to his position. X found Sophie coordinating her platoon's resupply. Her uniform was torn, and she had a cut across her forehead that she had not bothered to bandage. "Lieutenant, your defensive position sustained heavy casualties," X said. "Coalition doctrine suggests requesting replacement forces." looked at him with tired eyes. "We're still combat effective observer, we'll hold." "For how long?" "As long as it takes." The second assault came at dusk. They attacked with even greater force, having identified the human positions as the primary obstacle to breaking through coalition lines. Wave after wave of armored warriors threw themselves at the junction point where Splatoon held. Weapon emplacement took a direct hit from heavy weapons. The explosion should have killed him instantly. Somehow, survived, crawling from the wreckage with both arms broken. 2 Marines immediately moved to his position. "Get him out of here," ordered. "The position, Lieutenant," gasped, his face twisted in pain. "They'll break through." "We'll handle it, you've done enough." They carried away, even, as they pushed a new weapon into position to replace the destroyed emplacement. The junction wavered but did not break. X watched as a warrior larger than most crashed through the defensive barriers and engaged Danny Mitchell's squad in close combat. There was 3 times their size, armored like a tank, impossibly strong. The humans did not run. They engaged with a ferocity that shocked X. Mitchell shot the creature repeatedly, even when it seemed like the weapons had no effect. Another Marine circled behind it, targeting weak points in its armor. A third threw an explosive device that finally brought the massive warrior down. The cost was terrible. 2 of Mitchell's Marines fell in the engagement, struck down by this powerful blows. But they had stopped it. The second assault finally broke against the human positions like waves against stone. Their casualties mounting, their advance stalled by soldiers who simply refused to yield ground. Night fell over the battlefield. In the darkness, X could hear the sounds of wounded soldiers being treated, of defensive positions being reinforced, of quiet voices checking on each other. He found Colonel Brooks in the command bunker, studying casualty reports. "We've lost 32% of our effective combat strength," Brooks said quietly, more to himself than to X. "Evacuation is 60% complete. We need another 24 hours. "Can you hold that long?" X asked. Brooks looked at him, and X saw something in the colonel's eyes that he had never seen before in any warrior of any species. It was not confidence or bravado. It was not fearlessness. It was absolute certainty of purpose. "We'll hold," Brooks said simply, "because those civilians need us to." X looked at the tactical display, at the overwhelming forces preparing for another assault, at the battered human positions that should have collapsed hours ago. "I do not understand your species," X admitted. "By every tactical measure you should have withdrawn. You are outnumbered, outmatched in physical capability, suffering unsustainable casualties. Yet you remain." "You're thinking about this like a military equation," Brooks said. "Numbers and capabilities and odds, that's not how humans fight, observer." "Then how do you fight?" Brooks gestured toward the defensive positions visible through the bunker's viewports, where exhausted humans prepared for the next assault. Dawn broke over Settlement 73 with fire and smoke. X had not slept, spending the night in the command bunker watching as Colonel Brooks coordinated the defense through the dark hours. The had probed the human positions repeatedly, testing for weakness, finding none. Now the real battle was about to begin. "Evacuation status?" Brooks asked his communications officer. Lieutenant Gregory Hayes, wounded in the previous days fighting but refusing medical evacuation, checked his display. Blood seeped through a bandage on his shoulder, but his hands remained steady. 85% complete, sir," Hayes reported. "Final transports loading now. Estimate 12 hours to complete evacuation." Brooks nodded and forced disposition. "Massing for major assault. They're concentrating everything on our positions." Hayes paused. "Sir, intelligence has identified the command ship in low orbit. It's coordinating their ground forces." X watched as Brooks studied the tactical display, his weathered face showing the weight of impossible decisions. "If we could take out that command ship," Brooks said quietly, "disrupt their coordination, buy time for the evacuation." "It would require a direct assault through their lines," Hayes said. "The odds of success are minimal." "I know," Brooks replied. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he activated the battalion-wide communication channel. "All unit commanders report to command bunker immediately." Within minutes, the bunker filled with the surviving officers. Captain arrived, her uniform torn and burned. Danny Mitchell represented his decimated company. Sophie limped in, favoring a leg injured in the night fighting. Other human officers crowded into the space, along with a few coalition commanders whose units were still combat effective. Brooks did not waste time with pleasantries. Intelligence has located the command ship. If we can damage or disable it, we disrupt their entire offensive. That gives the evacuation more time. An officer spoke up. The ship is protected by their entire ground force. Any assault would be suicide. Mathematically, yes, Brooks agreed. But we're not talking about mathematics. We're talking about buying time for 30,000 civilians. Stepped forward. What are you proposing, Colonel? A strike force. Mixed volunteers from all available units. We punch through their lines, reach the ship, and do as much damage as possible before they respond. The bunker fell silent. X watched as the human officers processed this information. They all understood what Brooks was suggesting. It was not a military operation. It was a sacrifice. I'll lead it, said immediately. I'm coming, added. Third squad volunteers, Mitchell said. Other voices joined, coalition officers and human marines alike. X found himself speaking before he understood why. I will accompany the assault, he said, to observe. Brooks looked at him with something that might have been respect. Observer, this isn't your fight. Perhaps not, X replied, but I need to understand, I need to see. Brooks studied him for a moment, then nodded. All right, we move in 30 minutes, get your people ready. The next half hour was controlled chaos. Marines checked weapons, loaded ammunition, said quiet goodbyes to those staying behind. X watched as Jake approached. Captain, I'm staying with the wounded, said. They'll need a medic. I understand, replied. Keep them safe, Jake. You too, ma'am. They clasped hands briefly, a moment of connection between warriors who knew they might not see each other again. Lisa Morgan approached X as he prepared his observation equipment. Observer, can I ask you something? Yes, Private Morgan. Do you think we're crazy doing this? X considered the question carefully. By any rational measure, this assault is illogical. The chance of success is minimal. The casualties will be severe. That's not an answer to my question. No, X admitted. I do not think you are crazy. I think you are something I do not yet have words for. Morgan smiled slightly. Fair enough. The strike force assembled outside the command bunker. 53 soldiers, 32 humans, 21 from various coalition species. X positioned himself near the center, his recording equipment active. Colonel Brooks addressed them one final time. You all know what we're doing, he said, his voice carrying across the assembled soldiers. You know the odds, you know what this will cost. He paused, looking at each of them. And you're here anyway. That tells me everything I need to know about your courage. He straightened. We're not fighting for glory. We're not fighting for victory. We're fighting so that 30,000 people, most of whom we'll never meet, can live to see another day. That's the only mission that matters. That's the only thing you need to remember when it gets hard out there. Brooks drew his sidearm. Let's go get that ship. They moved out. The assault began with suppressing fire from the defensive positions. Human artillery and coalition heavy weapons hammered the lines, creating openings in their formation. The strike force advanced through the gaps, moving fast and low. X had studied countless battles. He had reviewed tactical operations from 100 different species. Nothing had prepared him for what he witnessed next. The humans changed. There was no other word for it. The quiet, methodical soldiers he had observed became something else entirely. They advanced with a focused intensity that was terrifying to witness, not with rage or bloodlust, but with absolute determination. A warrior blocked their path. Charlie Davis, a demolitions expert with explosive charges strapped across his chest, did not hesitate. He engaged the creature with precision, placing charges at weak points in its armor, detonating them with timing born from countless drills. They pushed deeper into enemy territory. Resistance intensified. Warriors swarmed from all directions. The strike force took casualties. A soldier went down. 2 humans fell to concentrated fire. But the advance did not stop. Lieutenant Cole commanded the armored support, 3 light vehicles that had joined the assault. His voice crackled over the communications channel. armor pushing forward, creating breach in Sector 12. The vehicles smashed through positions, their weapons clearing paths for the infantry. One vehicle took a direct hit and exploded. Cole's voice never wavered. Armor down to 2 units, continuing advance. X ran with them, his recording equipment capturing everything. He saw Sophie leading her squad in a flanking maneuver, moving with absolute confidence despite the chaos. He saw Danny Mitchell drag a wounded soldier to cover while under heavy fire, refusing to leave anyone behind. He saw at the front of the assault, her weapon firing constantly, her voice directing the attack with steady commands. Left flank swing wide, center push through, keep moving forward. They reached the command ship's position. The massive vessel dominated the landscape, its weapons batteries tracking ground targets. Warriors formed a defensive wall around it. The strike force hit them like a hammer. Human Marines and coalition soldiers crashed into the defensive line with everything they had. Close combat erupted across the entire front. X saw Charlie Davis sprint toward the ship's exposed landing struts, explosive charges in his hands. Fire cut him down 10 meters from his objective. Another Marine, Private Hayes, grabbed the fallen charges and continued Davis's run. He made it to the struts and planted the explosives before enemy fire found him. The charges detonated. The landing strut buckled. The massive ship listed to one side, its weapons systems going offline as power conduits severed. Primary objective achieved, Gregory Hayes reported from the command bunker, monitoring everything. Strike force, withdraw, withdraw, withdraw. But they were everywhere now, converging from all directions. The strike force began fighting their way back toward friendly lines, carrying their wounded with them. X saw something then that would change him forever. A young soldier, no older than X himself, went down with a leg injury. He cried out in pain and fear. X froze, uncertain what to do. Lisa Morgan did not freeze. She ran to the fallen soldier, dropping to cover him with her own body as fire whistled overhead. She returned fire with one hand while using the other to drag him toward safety. "I've got you," she said to the terrified. "You're going to be okay." Danny Mitchell appeared beside them, laying down covering fire. "Get him back, Morgan. We'll hold here." Morgan pulled the wounded soldier behind a barrier. She was hit then, a weapon striking her shoulder. She gasped in pain but did not let go of the soldier she was protecting. "Observer," she called out, "help me get him to the rally point." X moved without thinking. He grabbed the wounded's other arm, and together they stumbled back toward the coalition lines. Around them, the strike force fought a desperate retreat, every step contested. Sophie's squad held allowing others to pass through. Cole's remaining vehicle covered the withdrawal until it too was destroyed. Was the last to leave the battle zone, personally counting her people as they fell back. They reached coalition lines as the assault intensified. The disabled command ship was visible in the distance, smoke pouring from its damaged systems. The offensive had dissolved into chaos without central coordination. The evacuation would have its time. X collapsed behind the defensive barriers, his body shaking from exhaustion and fear. Around him, the survivors of the strike force regrouped. More than half had not made it back. Charlie Davis was gone. Hayes was gone. 17 humans and 12 coalition soldiers had died buying time for people they would never know. But the mission had succeeded. Colonel Brooks emerged from the command bunker as the final evacuation transports lifted off from the colony, packed with civilians. "All transports away," Gregory Hayes reported. "Evacuation complete." A cheer went up from the defensive positions, not loud or triumphant but genuine, relief mixed with grief for those lost. X watched as the surviving humans tended to each other's wounds, shared water, checked on soldiers from other species. Lisa Morgan sat nearby, her shoulder bandaged, talking quietly to the soldier she had saved. Approached Colonel Brooks. "Battalion status?" Brooks asked. 41% casualties, sir," reported. "But we held, every civilian made it out." Brooks nodded slowly. "Then we did our job." 3 weeks after Settlement 73, X stood before the Coalition Military Council in the Grand Chamber of Ara Prime. The same room where he had received his assignment, though he was not the same observer who had stood here before. "Admiral, Supreme Commander of Coalition Forces, sat at the center of the curved table where senior officers from 24 species gathered. The Admiral's purple scales caught the chamber's light as he gestured for X to begin his report. Observer X, you have completed your field assessment of human combat effectiveness. Present your findings. X activated his recording equipment. Images appeared on the chamber's display screens. Footage from Settlement 73. Human Marines at their defensive positions. The desperate assault on the command ship. Lisa Morgan shielding a wounded soldier with her own body. I was assigned to observe and document human tactical operations, X began. I have compiled extensive data on their combat performance, unit cohesion, and strategic decision-making. He paused, looking at the assembled officers. But the numbers do not tell the complete story. A general leaned forward. Explain, observer. X chose his words carefully. Human combat doctrine operates on principles that most species do not recognize as military tactics. They do not fight primarily for territorial gain or strategic advantage. They fight to protect those who cannot protect themselves. All coalition forces have protective duties, Admiral interjected. This is not unique to humans. You are correct, Admiral, X replied. But there is a difference between duty and purpose. For most species, protection is a mission parameter. For humans, it is the reason they fight at all. He activated another recording. Colonel Brooks addressing his battalion before the final assault. We're not fighting for glory. We're not fighting for victory. We're fighting so that 30,000 people can live to see another day. The chamber was silent as Brooks's words echoed through the space. At Settlement 73, human forces sustained 41% casualties, X continued. By any tactical measure, they should have withdrawn when casualties reached 20%. Coalition doctrine requires retreat at 30% losses. Yet they remained, Admiral observed. They remained because civilians still needed evacuation time, X confirmed. The humans calculated that every hour they held the defensive line allowed another 2,000 civilians to reach safety. So they held for 36 hours against forces that outnumbered them 3-1. He showed more footage. Sophie's platoon at the junction point, refusing to yield despite overwhelming assault. At his weapon emplacement, both arms broken, still directing fire before he would accept medical evacuation. I do not understand this behavior, an officer said. It violates basic survival instinct. That is precisely the point, X replied. Human warriors operate beyond survival instinct. They possess the capacity to override their own preservation in service of others. He activated another recording. This one showed the aftermath of the battle. Human Marines sharing their medical supplies with wounded coalition soldiers. Danny Mitchell's squad helping repair defensive positions for other species. Jake treating injured prisoners with the same care he showed coalition wounded. This requires explanation, Admiral said. They treated enemy wounded. Yes, Admiral. After the offensive collapsed, human forces provided medical care to captured enemy soldiers. When I asked Corporal Jake why he would help those who had tried to kill him hours before, his response was simple. The injured were no longer a threat, and he had the ability to ease their suffering. Therefore, he helped them. The chamber erupted in discussion. Some officers argued this showed human weakness. Others suggested it was a psychological tactic. X waited for the noise to subside. It is neither weakness nor tactic, he said firmly. It is moral conviction. Humans possess the capacity for extreme violence when protecting others, but they also retain compassion for defeated enemies. These two qualities exist simultaneously within their species. He showed his final set of recordings, leading the assault on the command ship. The same captain, 6 hours later, coordinating medical aid for wounded prisoners. Charlie Davis planting explosives with deadly precision. Lisa Morgan, who had served in Davis's unit, gently tending to the soldier she had protected. I have studied warfare for 3 cycles, X said. I learned tactical theory, strategic doctrine, weapon systems, and combat psychology. None of my training prepared me for what I witnessed among human warriors. He looked directly at Admiral. They are not the strongest species. They are not the fastest or the most technologically advanced. But they are the most dangerous, Admiral, and the reason why is what makes them invaluable to the coalition. Explain, commanded. Because they choose when to use violence, X replied. Most warrior species fight because it is their nature, are bred for combat, live for conquest, view warfare as duty. But humans could be peaceful if they wished. They have that capacity. Yet when those weaker than themselves need protection, they become the most formidable warriors in the galaxy. He paused, remembering Colonel Brooks's words in the command bunker. The most dangerous species is not the one that cannot stop fighting. It is the one that could choose peace but deliberately chooses to fight when others need defending. Because that species fights with absolute moral certainty. They know why they are fighting, who they are protecting, and what they are willing to sacrifice. That clarity of purpose makes them unstoppable. The chamber fell silent as his words settled over the assembled officers. A younger commander spoke up. But observer, you have described humans as both compassionate and violent. These traits seem contradictory. They are not contradictory, X replied. They are complementary. Humans are violent in the defense of compassion. They fight so that others do not have to. They kill when necessary to protect the innocent. But they never lose sight of the moral weight of violence. He showed one final recording, the human memorial service held after Settlement 73. Marines standing in formation, honoring their fallen. But they also honored the dead, acknowledging that even their enemies had been living beings. They remember, X said quietly. Every life taken weighs on them. Every act of violence leaves a mark. This is what separates humans from species that fight because it is their nature. Humans fight despite their nature, and they carry the burden of that choice. Admiral leaned back in his seat, studying the footage displayed around the chamber. Observer X, what is your official assessment? Should human forces be integrated into coalition military structure? X did not hesitate. Admiral, humans should not merely be integrated. They should be the foundation upon which we build our defensive doctrine, because they do not fight to conquer. They fight to protect. And any species that joins the coalition should know that humans will defend them with the same ferocity they defend their own. Even at great cost to themselves, observed. Especially at great cost to themselves, X confirmed. That is what makes them humanity. They measure success not by victory, but by how many they saved. At Settlement 73, they lost 68 Marines, but 30,000 civilians escaped. When I asked Colonel Brooks if the cost was worth it, he said yes without hesitation, because those civilians would live, and that was all that mattered to him. The council deliberated for less than an hour before Admiral announced their decision. Human forces would receive expanded roles in coalition defensive operations. Their tactical doctrine would be studied and adapted, and observers from other species would be assigned to learn from them, as X had. After the session ended, X found Commander waiting in the corridor outside. Your report was thorough, Observer said. Tell me, did you understand why I assigned you to the humans? Because theoretical knowledge means nothing without practical understanding, X replied. You knew I would dismiss them as unremarkable until I saw them in actual combat. Smiled slightly, and now. X thought of Lisa Morgan, who had overcome her fear to protect a soldier from another species. Of Jake, treating enemy wounded with gentle care. Of Danny Mitchell, who fought not from hatred but from love for those behind him. Of leading a suicide mission because it gave civilians more time to escape. Now I understand why the galaxy fears them, X said, and why the galaxy needs them. Fear and need, mused. An interesting combination. They are an interesting species, X replied. 6 months later, X returned to Settlement 73. The colony had been rebuilt with coalition support. 30,000 civilians lived there now, representing 8 different species, all aware that they owed their lives to the soldiers who had held the defensive line. A memorial stood in the colony's central plaza. Names were carved into black stone. 68 humans, 32 coalition soldiers from various species, all who had died buying time for the evacuation. X found Captain there, standing before the memorial. She had recovered from her wounds and now commanded a full company. Her promotion had come with commendations from 3 different coalition species. Observer X, she greeted him. I heard you were visiting the colony. I wanted to see what we protected, X replied, to understand if the cost was justified. They stood together in silence, watching as colony residents went about their daily lives. Children played in a nearby park, parents talked and laughed, shop vendors called out their wares. "Do you think it was worth it?" asked quietly. X watched a young child, perhaps the same one Lisa Morgan had protected, run past with human and children in a game of some kind. "Yes," he said, "absolutely yes." Smiled slightly. "Good, because we'd do it again if we had to." "I know you would," X replied. "That is what makes humans both terrifying and irreplaceable." They remained at the memorial as the sun set over the colony, casting long shadows across the names of the fallen. Those warriors would never see the life they had preserved, the children they had saved, the future they had secured. But they had known the cost when they took their positions, and they had paid it anyway. That night, X composed his final personal log entry about the human species. After extensive observation and analysis, I have reached a conclusion about why the stars tremble when human warriors charge into battle. It is not because they are unstoppable, though they often are. It is not because they are fearless, because they feel fear as deeply as any species. It is because they have made a choice that few species are capable of making. They have chosen to be the shield for others, even when it costs them everything. They have chosen to carry the burden of necessary violence so others can live in peace. They have chosen to remember every cost, every life, every moral weight of their actions, and they fight anyway when the innocent need defending. The stars tremble because humanity represents something the galaxy has never seen before. Warriors who fight not from hate but from love. Soldiers who measure victory not in territory gained but in lives saved. A species that could destroy but chooses to protect. That is humanity. That is why we need them. And that is why, despite the fear they inspire, every species in the coalition should be grateful they fight on our side. X closed the log entry and looked out at the stars beyond his viewport. Somewhere out there, human soldiers stood watch on defensive lines, protecting species they barely knew, fighting for people they would never meet. And the galaxy was safer for it. X finally understood. He understood why Commander had assigned him to observe humans. He understood why other species spoke of them with such weight. It was not their strength, or their technology, or their tactics. It was this, the absolute refusal to abandon those who needed protection. The willingness to sacrifice everything for people they did not know, of species they had only recently met. The stars trembled not because humans were warriors. The stars trembled because humans chose when to be warriors, and what they fought for. We fight for the people behind us. Every Marine out there knows that every minute they hold this line is another family that reaches safety. That's not a tactical calculation, that's purpose. And purpose is stronger than armor, observer. Purpose doesn't break. X recorded these words, though he still did not fully understand them. The night wore on, they prepared for their next assault, and the humans, battered and bleeding but unbroken, waited at their positions. They moved. X stumbled after them, his observation equipment clutched in trembling limbs. Around him, coalition forces were digging in, establishing fortifications, setting up weapon emplacements, and somewhere in the distance he could hear it. The sound of warriors advancing. The battle was about to begin, and X suddenly understood that all his studying, all his theoretical knowledge, meant nothing. He was about to see warfare as it truly was, and the humans he had dismissed as unremarkable were about to show him something he would never forget. He was completely wrong.